Okay, Tavach. Well, welcome back to a special edition of uh, Kol Neshama Mochi Shabbos Shir. We don't usually do a Mochi Shabbos Shir, but we have to make up a Perek from Erev Sukkot in order to make the Siyum tomorrow on the original date. So we're doing a Shir tonight, Perek Gimel, a Bikkurim, and tomorrow will be our Perek Dalit and our Siyum on Bikkurim at my house at 12:30. If you need the address, please send me a WhatsApp. Thank you. Okay. Tonight's shir sponsor, Lila Nishmas, Our Nachman ben Simcha Cohen, Yoshua Mordechai ben Shepsel, Bracha Sarva Shmuel Leib, and B'yam Moshe ben Yosef, and the Shemas will have an aliyah. It's also sponsored as a schutz for Avigdor Aaron ben Gittel Masha. To be a shecher bracha v'atzlacha for him and his wife and all his family, and special to the second week of um, Kislev is being sponsored by the Blackbird Recruiting Group. May they have hatzlacha in their business. Okay, Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph. Now we're going to talk about how Bikurim are designated and brought to the base of Migdash and what is done with them there. How does one designate truma? What's the process? Person goes down into his field and sees a fig that is the first to emerge. This is when all the petals of the blossoms fall away and the budding fruits can now be seen. Now the Mishnah is describing the preferred way to do a mitzvah. If someone did not fail to designate Bikurim when his fruits were still attached to the ground, but he waited until after they were harvested, he can still make the designation then. Although that's not the mufchar way of doing things. Eshkol shebikir, or if you saw a cluster of grapes that is the first to emerge, Rima shebikir, or a pomegranate that is the first to emerge, kosher begemi, he ties it with a reed so he will remember which fruit they are. The Omer Hare Elu Bikurim. He says these are Bikurim. Rishimon Omer Rishimon says Afa Pichen. Even if he did this, he said that they are Bikurim. Choser Bikuri Osam Bikurim Mi'acha Shishlo Shemenakaka. He must call them Bikurim again after they have been detached from the ground. Okay, so he ties a simon on them to make sure that they knows which ones they are, was time to harvest them, but he's got to designate them a second time. So, Kates and Malinas, Mishnah base. Kates and Malinas Bikurim. How do we bring the Bikurim up to the base of it? Let's call Yaros Shibimamad, Wisconsin, the Ir Shamamad. All the people who lived in the towns of the local Mamad gather in the main town of the Mamad, in the town where the local, where the leader of the Mamad means. So what's a Mamad? Let's just go off a second. So we know that there were 24 mishmaros of Kohanim and Levim. They were divided into 24 groups, and that's called mishmaros. And they each served on a rotation of 1 week a year. It would take 24 weeks to go through a rotation for the Yom Tovim, for Pesach, and for Shavuos and Sukkot. And during each week rotation, one Mishmar, Kohanim, and Levim would come up to the base of Midrash and serve that week, and the Mishmaros would change on Shabbos afternoon. During the Yom Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, when there was a lot of people there, all the Mishmaros were on call during Yontif. Okay, but anyways, so with each Mishmar, Kohanim, and Levim, there was a group of Yisraelim designated to that Mishmar, and that's called a Mamad. The word Mamad came from the point that when the Kohanim and Levim were in the base of Midrash doing the avoda, the Israelim would also be in the base of Midrash, and they would be standing around to watch the avoda take place, and also to be part of the tefillas and everything, because you needed to have representatives of Klal Yisrael in the Beis Hamikdash in order to be makabel the schusim of the Kohen Tzibur. Kohen Tzibur has to be done with the tzibur. So you need the representatives of Klal Yisrael to be present while the Kabbalah are being brought, and therefore they had a designated group called the Ma'amados, because they're Ma'am comes from standing, and the standing they're not actually doing anything in particular, but they are but to be makabel the schusim of the karbanos and the avodah on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So they also had a rotation of every week. Okay. Anyways, back to the Mishnah. Okay, so that's the mom. So they gather in the main town of the head of that mamad, and they would sleep overnight in the town square. And they would not go into any houses, so they would not become tummy. You're going to Beis Hamikdash, and be careful with tumah tahara. Mashkim haya amamuna omer. In the morning, the leader of the group, the appointed one, says, "Kumu v'na let Zion el Beis Hashem Elokeinu." Rise and let's go up to Zion to Hashem our God. Okay, it's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Mishnah Gimel. Hakrovim evim hate'enim v'hanavim. Those who live near to Yerushalayim bring fresh figs and grapes as Bikkurim. This is preferable to bring fresh fruits rather than dry ones. V'arechokim evim grogros and but those who live far from Yerushalayim, they bring dried figs and raisins because fresh fruit might spoil by the time they reach the Beis Hamikdash. Because some of these people are traveling for 2 weeks' time. By leave the regal, it took them 2 weeks to get home. So some of these people are coming from 2 week journey, and by the time they get there, the stuff's already spoiled. Sure, the ox walks in front of them. This ox is offered as a shlamim, because we learned previously that when Bikurim are brought, it's brought with a shlamim, with a korban shlamim. So each person who is being Bikurim owned a part of the ox, so that the korban would belong to all of them. Okay, the karna mitzuva zahav, and its horns. The horns of the ox were coated with gold. And a wreath of olive branches is on its head. This was right, because they made the wreath out of one of the shivas minim, and from the shivas minim that are brought as Bikurim, the olive tree is the most beautiful, and its leaves are the freshest. That's why you're using a wreath of olives. Torah shall zayis berosho, and a wreath. Okay, we just they ready. The flute plays in front of them until they approach Yerushalayim. Once they approach Yerushalayim, they send messengers ahead of them to let the people of Yerushalayim know that they are coming. In the meantime, they adorn their baskets of Bikurim. Making them like nice and pretty when they bring them into the Beis Hamikdash. The princes, the leaders of Klal Yisrael, the leaders of the Kohanim, and the treasurers of the temple, they come out to greet them. According to the honor of those going in is the honor of those going out. Meaning that the greater the number of people bringing the Bikurim, then the greater number of officials that go out to read them. So if you have, let's say, 1,000 people coming in with Bikurim, then you would have maybe 1,000 people or more to go greet them. If they have like 50 people coming in, then a smaller delegation was going out to greet them, to bring them into the Beis Hamikdash. And when they enter the city, all the craftsmen of Yerushalayim stand up before them as a show of honor for people doing a mitzvah. And they inquire after the welfare, saying, our brothers, the people of such and such a place, have arrived in peace. You know, to make sure that they're all good to go. I want to give them the honor of like bringing them to be cool. I want to give them cover. Mishnah Dalit. The flute plays in front of them until they reach the Harbayis. Higila Harbayis, when they reached the Harbayis, Afilu Agrippas Hamelech Notel Asal Akseifa V'Nichnaf. Even what each one of them, even the king Agrippas, takes his basket of Bikkurim on his shoulder and enters the temple, the base of Mikdash. On the way, they might have the baskets on their animals or on the wagons or whatever. Once they go into the Beis Hamikdash, each person by himself has to carry the actual basket, cannot rely on the animal to schlep it. He carries it until he reaches the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Once he reaches the courtyard, the Levium break out in song. This capital Lamed, we say it every day. I exalt you, God, because you lifted me up and you did not let my enemies rejoice over me. This is what happens when you give a shimmer to Shabbos at the Kos Hadali. You start to get the influence of some wine. Okay, Mishnah Hey. Actually, the footnote on why this kapitel was chosen is actually ties into this week's parsha, where this kapitel is similar to the parshas that Bikkurim. Just as the parsha Bikkurim begins with Arami Ovid Avi, that an Aramean tried to destroy my father, meaning that we're praising Hashem for saving Yaakov from his father-in-law Lavan. So too, this kapitel starts with, "You lifted me up, and you did not let my enemies rejoice over me." Now, we're talking about today's parsha where Lavan and Yaakov were butting heads the whole time. Putting that shortly, simply. Mishnah Hey. Okay. Hagozlo shall al gabe hasalim hayu olos. The young birds that are on the basket of Bikurim were brought as olah offerings. Mash biyadam nas and the kohanim. What is in the people's hands, the Bikurim themselves, is given to the kohanim. Okay. Mishnah Vav. This is when they are in. Okay, Odeyu Hasal Aksefo. Well, the basket is still on his shoulder. Kore Yigati Hayom Hashem Alkecha. He reads from the pasuk. What's the pasuk? Yigati Hayom Hashem Alkecha. Imarte love. Yigati Hayom Hashem Alkecha. Kivas Yal Aretz. Ashenishbata Hashem Alseinu Lasses Lama. That's in the first few psukim of Kisavo. So he reads from there. He reads from, "I declare today to Hashem your God," etc. Let me just read the whole pasuk. "You shall say to the Kohen, I declare today to Hashem your God, I have come to the land that Hashem swore to our forefathers to give to us." And he reads the entire parsha. Then goes off the psukim. He reads that the Kohen shall take the basket from your hands and place it before the mizbech of Hashem your God, and then the following pasuk, Arami Ovid Avi, etc., etc. You shall speak before Hashem your God and say that Aramean tried to destroy my father, and it goes on for another 7 psukim, 5 or 6 psukim. Yehuda says, "Ad Arami Avi," that according to Yehuda, he reads until Arami Avi, and there is the first part of the parsha, when he comes into the to the when he comes into the courtyard, Higia Rami Avid Avi Morid Hasam Aksef of Aksel Bisvasav. And before he reaches the second part, which begins Rami Avi Avi, then he takes the basket down from his shoulder and holds it by its rim. The Kohen Maniach Yado Tachtov, and the Kohen puts his hand underneath the basket. Hamanifo, and the Kohen waves it together with him. The Rami Ovid Avi Aichu Gomer Kol Parsha. The owner then reads the second part of the parsha, starting from Rami Avi until he finishes the whole parsha. He then places the basket at the side of the mizbeach. He prostrates himself on the floor of the Azara, the Yatza, and he leaves. That is the process. Mishnah Zion, Birishona, and obviously goes without saying that, like, with his face toward the Heichal, he walks out backwards, just showing respect to the Heichal. Much like when people leave the kosel, they walk backwards so as not to have their back toward the kosel. Mishnah Zion, Birishona, Kol Mishiyodei Likros Kore. Originally, anyone who knew how to read would read the Parshas Bikkurim on their own. So anyone who did not know how to read, they would dictate the passage to them, and he would repeat each word. Nimno Melahavi. In the course of time, people who could not read stopped bringing Bikkurim because they were embarrassed, having known that they were not able to read. Hiskinu Sheyehumakrin as Misha David as Misha Anyodeh. So to prevent this embarrassment, the Chachamim decreed that the parsha would be dictated both to everyone, and they would repeat, and everyone who gathered would repeat the words, so that no one is embarrassed about one skill over the other. This is also the origin of having a balkore for Kriyas Torah, so that no one should be embarrassed. Mishnah Ches, Hashirim Meviim Bikureihem. Wealthy people would bring the Bikurim in baskets of silver and gold. And poor people would bring them in baskets of peeled willow branches. And in the case of the poor, the baskets and the Bikurim would be given to the Kohanim. Right, they were given it to Kohanim because the best, because they wanted to because that was a way to substantiate their gift, because the poor people were being the very little amount, and so it was a way to give cover to the poor people and to substantiate the gift by also giving the basket as well. But the rich people, since they brought a lot of Bikurim, then their gold and silver baskets were returned to them to take home with them. Mishnah S. Maybe Shimon ben Nanas, Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas says, we may adorn the Bikurim even with species other than the Shivas Haminim. And Akiva says, we can adorn the Bikurim only with the Shivas Haminim, and we cannot add more. That would be a problem with Baal Tosef, according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Mishnah Yud, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Shalosh Midos Bikurim. There are 3 levels of Bikurim. Habikurim, the actual Bikurim, the fruit that the owner designated as Bikurim when he first saw them on the tree. Etosev is Habikurim, and additional Bikurim which are the fruits that he adds to his Bikurim at the time of the harvest. Itor Habikurim, and decorative Bikurim, which are the fruit that he uses to decorate the Bikurim. The additional Bikurim and the decorative Bikurim must also be given to the Kohen who has to eat them in Yerushalayim. And now we're going to talk about the laws that apply to those second and third categories. Tosevis Habikurim in Mamino, the additional Bikurim must be of the same type of fruit as the actual Bikurim. The Itor Habikurim min b'shein lamino, but particular bikurim may be of a different type. Meaning that if someone designated figs as a bikurim, he can designate only figs as additional bikurim. But if he went ahead and designated a different type, so there's grapes for additional bikurim, they do not gain that status, rather they automatically become subject to the laws of decorated bikurim. But they still have to come from shiur saminim. Toseres habikurim nachalas b'taharat. The additional bikurim must be eaten in a state of purity, and the patura min hadamai, and the additional bikurim are pater from damai. The iter habikurim chayiv damai, but decorative bikurim are chayiv in damai. Therefore, if a kohen receives decorative bikurim from an amaretz, he must separate mice before eating them. Mishnah Yud Aleph. When did the Chachamim say that additional bikurim and decorative bikurim are like actual bikurim? When they say the categories 2 and 3 are the category 1? Bisman shehibam in the aretz, when they come from the land on the main part of Eretz Yisrael, which is the western side of the Jordan River. But if they do not come from Eretz Yisrael, but rather they came from the eastern side of the Jordan, or maybe up in Syria, they are not like actual bikurim, and they do not get that designation. Mishnah Yud Beis, this is the last one for tonight. In what respect do the Chachamim say that bikurim are the property of the kohen? They are his in that he may use them even to buy slaves, land, or non-kosher work animals, despite the fact that bikurim are meant to be eaten by the kohen, and these are non-food items. And a creditor may take bikurim from a kohen as payment for his debt. The isha b'ksubasa, and a woman may take bikurim from a kohen as payment for a ksuba, for Torah, and the same is true of a Torah scroll that can be taken by a creditor collecting debt, and a woman can take, and can be taken by a woman who's collecting her ksuba. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, he argues with this, and he says, "Ein noisnin osam ela lechaver b'tova." A kohen may give his bikurim only to another kohen who is a chaver, someone who's careful in tumah and tahara, and he may only give it to them as a favor without receiving anything in exchange. This, as opposed to the previous time, who says he can take it for payment to buy whatever he wants. The Chachamim say, no, the owner gives the bikurim to the members of the Mishmar of Kohanim serving in the temple that week. And they divide the bikurim amongst themselves, including those who are not chaverim. Just like all the karbanos of the Mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash are divided amongst all the Kohanim of the week's Mishmar, whether or not they are chaverim. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow morning we will finish the Perek in time for the Siyum. Good Tavach, and have a wonderful evening.
Good Bach. See you tomorrow, Mr.